The tension in the Oval Office was so thick, it could have been sliced with a presidential pen. President Donald J. Trump stood behind the resolute desk, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Across from him, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi stood firm, her voice unwavering despite the storm she had just walked into. "You called me here to tell me I crossed the line," she said, her eyes locked with Trump's. "But I crossed it for you." Trump didn't flinch. "That's not the point." Pam took a step closer. "Then tell me what is." "Because the American people are watching a justice system that's been weaponized. You know it, I know it, and yet you're lecturing me on restraint." Trump exhaled deeply. "You went on national television and accused a sitting federal judge of treason, Pam. That's not a legal argument, that's a nuclear strike." She slammed a file onto the desk, papers fanning out like shrapnel. "And I brought the proof. You think this is about headlines? This judge buried evidence in a case tied to your administration. And the media's painting it as a partisan smear. I'm not backing down." The room fell silent for a moment. Trump paced. The fireplace behind him flickered, throwing shadows across the American flag. "Do you have any idea what it took to keep this country from tearing itself apart the first time they called me a traitor?" he muttered. Pam's tone softened slightly. "You didn't tear it apart. You held it together, Mr. President. But the glue was truth. And if we let one more corrupt official get away with burying justice just because it's politically convenient, then we're no better than them." Trump stopped walking. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "So what do you want from me?" Pam walked around the desk, standing beside him, not across. "I want you to stand with me. I want you to say, we don't protect power, we protect the people. You ran on draining the swamp. Now help me finish the job." Trump looked at the photo on his desk, him shaking hands with a young soldier, long since gone. "A symbol. A reminder. Do you really think this country still believes in justice?" he asked. "I don't care what they believe right now," Pam replied. "I care about what they'll remember." Just then a knock on the door. An aide peeked in. "Mr. President, the press is gathered. They're expecting a statement." Trump looked at Pam. She didn't blink. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs, and nodded. "Let's give them one." Together, they exited the room. But inside, the echoes of their conversation lingered, about a system fraying at the edges and two people who refused to let it snap. Not yet. The press room buzzed like a hornet's nest. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, and the scent of political blood was thick in the air. They weren't there to hear an update. They came for a fracture, either in the system or in Donald Trump himself. Pam Bondi walked in first, poised and composed, followed by the former president, his expression unreadable. The flashbulbs exploded. Silence fell. "Good afternoon," Trump began, his voice steady. "Today I stand before you not as a politician, but as a citizen. And what I have to say may not please everyone in this room, but it will be the truth." Pam watched from the side, arms crossed. "There's a case that has come to light, one that questions the integrity of a federal judge tied to decisions made during my administration. I want to be clear. If the allegations are true, then the rule of law demands accountability. Not just for our enemies, but for those who claim to stand with us." Gasps. Reporters scribbled wildly. The shock wasn't in what he said, but that he had said it. Pam stepped up. "The Constitution doesn't bend to power. It bends power to the people. And when that principle is violated, whether by a senator or a judge, someone has to say enough." A reporter shouted from the back, "Is this political revenge, MS?" "Bondi." "No," she said calmly. "This is justice remembering how to breathe." The press erupted in questions. Trump held up his hand. "No more statements. The facts will speak next." Back in the West Wing, the real war began. Trump's advisors were livid. "You just reopened every wound from the last 6 years," one barked. "You think they won't come for you harder now?" "They never stopped," Trump replied. Another aide slammed a folder on the table. "We vetted that judge. We needed him during the 2020 hearings. Are you going to disown everyone who helped you win?" Pam cut in. "What did we win if we traded truth for convenience?" The room fell still. Trump said nothing, just stared at the folder. Later that night, in the quiet of the Lincoln bedroom, Trump met Pam again. This time with less fire, more fatigue. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "if we're just shouting into a void? That the system doesn't care who's right, just who survives?" Pam leaned against the doorway. "It's not about surviving. It's about leaving something behind that mattered. Even if the whole system is corrupt, we still get to choose whether we are. He looked at her for a long time. You remind me of someone. Who? My mother. Tough as hell. Raised me to never let the loudest person in the room decide the truth. Pam smirked. Then let's not let the loudest headlines do it either. The next morning, an internal memo leaked. The DOJ had quietly reopened the investigation into Judge Cranston. By mid-afternoon, #Cranston Files was trending. Talk shows exploded. Pundits speculated. Was this the beginning of a Trump-Bondi alliance against the deep state? Or was it a final stand for two political warriors tired of playing nice? That evening, Pam held a town hall, taking every question, every accusation. And in the middle of it all, someone asked, "Do you really think one investigation will change anything?" Pam paused. Then she said, "No. But silence definitely won't." Somewhere in the crowd, a Vietnam veteran stood up and clapped. Alone at first. Then others joined. Not because they agreed with every word, but because they recognized something real. And that, Pam thought, was how justice begins again. The courtroom was full. Reporters, legal scholars, retired judges, and everyday citizens packed into the marble-lined chamber where Judge Cranston was finally called to testify. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a national reckoning, televised, dissected, and politically loaded. Pam Bondi sat in the front row. Her expression was composed, but her eyes betrayed the weight she carried. Across the aisle, Donald Trump leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. For once, he wasn't the center of attention, and he seemed fine with that. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, are you aware that your prior rulings suppressed evidence tied to an active federal investigation?" Cranston cleared his throat. "I acted within the limits of my judicial discretion." "Did you disclose those decisions to Congress when questioned under oath?" A long pause. Then, softly, "No." Gasps echoed. Pam exhaled. Trump's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. In that moment, something shifted. Not just in the courtroom, but across the country. Social media erupted. Not with outrage, but with something rarer, acknowledgement. The truth, ugly and overdue, had finally surfaced. That evening, in a televised address from a modest studio, not the Oval Office, Trump and Pam Bondi sat side by side. No flags. No music. Just two voices. Trump spoke first. "For years, I said we'd drain the swamp. But the truth is, sometimes the rot doesn't hide in shadows. It sits on a bench, wears a robe, and holds a gavel." Pam followed. Justice doesn't protect itself. It takes people willing to lose power, credibility, and comfort to uphold it. The broadcast was watched by 18 million people. Many of them senior Americans who had lived through Watergate, the Civil Rights Movement, and a dozen broken promises. But this felt different. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt sincere. The aftermath wasn't clean. There were investigations, resignations, and even threats. But there was also clarity. The Department of Justice reopened oversight protocols. Whistleblower protections were quietly strengthened. And one by one, other sealed decisions from Judge Cranston's court were reviewed. Pam Bondi went back to Florida. She declined an offer to run for Senate. "My job," she said in an interview, "was never about office. It was about light." Donald Trump, for once, didn't fight the headlines. In a rare moment at a private fundraiser, he was overheard saying, "Pam was right. We didn't win by yelling louder. We won by stopping long enough to listen." Weeks later, in a town outside Dayton, Ohio, a high school civics teacher named Marian Johnson changed her lesson plan. She replaced a unit on campaign ads with a deep dive into judicial ethics, using the Cranston case as her case study. And when a student asked her why it mattered, she said, "Because history doesn't change in silence. It changes when someone refuses to look away." At a small veterans hall in Florida, a group of retired Marines watched a rerun of the final hearing. One of them turned to his buddy and muttered, "Never thought I'd say it, but Trump shut up, and it made all the difference." Pam, sitting quietly on her porch later that week, received a letter. No return address. Just a typed message on plain paper. Justice doesn't need noise. It needs courage. "Thank you." She folded it slowly and smiled. Maybe they hadn't changed the whole system, but they had cracked something open. And sometimes that's how revolutions start, not with fire, but with a breath. In the end, it wasn't the roar of crowds or the echo of headlines that defined the moment. It was the quiet conviction of two people who refused to be silenced. Donald Trump, once known for his thunderous presence, chose instead to let truth speak louder than pride. Pam Bondi, armed not with power but with principle, reminded a nation that justice isn't a performance, it's a promise. Together, they didn't rewrite history, but they reawakened its conscience. In a country worn down by division and noise, their stand became a whisper that grew into a movement. Not everyone agreed. Not everyone clapped. But somewhere across America, people looked up and realized that integrity, once dismissed as weakness, had found a voice again. And in that voice was hope, not just for justice, but for a country still willing to fight for it.